or, intentional, but is not negatively directed by greed or desire, right? Like I kind of have done some meditating and thinking and reflecting lately about, desire and what it really feels like and how it really functions, right? So just kind of having my attention on desire and that component to a lot of different experiences, right? Like, so I tried fasting, like dealing with the desire for hunger or food, primary strong one, and how that it like arises in my brain and body. And kind of like, what was another one I was doing? Like restricting video games, and I could feel the desire to play a video game. I would say that's kind of like pleasurable entertainment, right? Not
Okay.
productive necessarily, but still fun and great, right? Everybody likes to be entertained. So, but I could feel within all these different things, from like a benign or good desire, like the desire for food, to like what we might say is a essential part of life to relax and to unwind and entertainment, but that one can be overdone. So, and then like maybe another one might be like the desire or the that element in like the things that are not really necessary. So like caffeine every day, like coffee every day, energy drinks every day. That's a really bad one for me because it's like socially acceptable and it's like, oh, why not drink caffeine? Everybody drinks caffeine. But I could feel it has that desire element to it because it's anything that's really powerful, strong, and stimulating is going to create a desire response, and it's going to create like desire programming, and it's going to just it has a really big impact, right? That's what I'm finding. Um, so I noticed that there's this trend of all these different things in life that are quite enjoyable, right? Anything that's enjoyable is going to increase the feeling of desire and also like set you down this cascading path of like evolving desire, right? You give in to one. This is the worst part about it. You give into one desire, they all balloon out of proportion and it goes crazy. Um, so, anyways, I've been kind of like thinking about it and experiencing, having a lot of frustration, really being frustrated by desire and complete inability to really control it or kind of not be overwhelmed by it. So
Okay.
hopefully that's kind of what's been going on with me lately.
All right. Well, you've opened up a whole issue of topics that we can talk about. One is the issue of will, and so we'll play with that one for a while. But let's get started with it just a little bit because it's full of jokes. There's some jokes about it that I like. Okay. One of the things that we can use the word will is in fact the will to live. This is an important point. Every one of us is confronted with this on occasion, but if we realize what life really is, it will be there much, much more frequently. Okay. So, an example of that is imagine that here you are living on a relatively low floor of a high rise apartment building that someplace in one of the cities that Russia is bombing tonight. And your building gets hit. And here you have the whole rest of the building down on you. And there you are laying inside the rubble and you can hear them digging around way away trying to find to rescue bodies. The question is, how long are you going to hold out, trapped in the rubble of the building that is just falling on you? What is your will to live? Okay, that same will to live is there with people who are very sick sometimes in the hospital, and some people just give up, and others will survive because they have the will to live. Now, the question, this will to live, even no matter how desperate things are, like very, very sick or very heavy weights upon you, and so it's really hard to breathe. The question that I would raise is that will to live, is that an intellectual kind of thing? Or is that something very much deeper? In other words, is that part of the adult mind, or is it part of the reptilian mind? And the answer to that would be a combination of all. That you would have to have the will to live intellectually, the will to live at the basic level of existence, and the will to live basically in the mid-range because you're supposed to. Because you're supposed to stay alive. You're not supposed to give up. So if we can understand this issue of will to live, then we can understand about the will that has to do with desire. Because will and desire are very, very closely related. Now, this will to live that we're talking about in our society, and in fact almost everywhere, staying alive is a little bit better than dying. And if you've got a choice, generally people will choose to stay alive. The question is do you think or do you know you have a choice? Because a lot of people don't know that they have a choice. And so this is the difference now between getting into free will versus the Christian kind of free will versus do you have free will or not. The free will here has to do with whether or not you know you've got choices or not. That in fact this free will issue is wrapped up with the issues that we have with words like destiny, providence, predicting the future, and whatnot like that. And the answer to that is that, well, first off, no one knows the future. But we know that if we go west, we will have different experiences than if we go east. Okay, so if you're going down this path, your future will be whatever is down this path. And if you don't know that you've got a choice about which path to take, then you don't have any free will. In other words, your destiny. So if somebody, every time that somebody calls you a particular name, let us say it's a name from childhood, and sometime around the, let's say the age of 7 or 10 or something like that, the child doesn't like that name anymore and he wants to have a new name. And then every time someone calls him the old name, he gets angry. And he doesn't have any choice about getting angry because he's not getting what he wants. He wants to have the new name, and people keep by habit call even aunts and uncles that don't see him very often. They'll call him the name that they've known him by all of this time, and it's kind of hard for them to change it. Every time he gets angry because they won't adhere to what he wants. Yes, Robert, go right ahead.
Oh, I have a funny example of that. When I was a little kid, I had a hard time with my R's. So I would introduce myself to the other kids in preschool as Wobbert, not Robert. And so they would call me Wobbert. And I would say, that's not my name, it's Wobbert. It's not Wobbert, it's Wobbert. And and it created a dilemma, and I'd get pretty upset.
So this is exactly what we're talking about, in the sense that desire and will are kind of basically the same thing. Okay, desire and will are almost the same thing. It's only got a bit of perspective difference in it. And so one of the things, Corey, that you were talking about indicates that the word that you use when you use the word desire, there's something kind of wrong with it, in the sense that you shouldn't desire things. And yet it's okay for you to have the will to live.
Yeah, it's kind of like desire, the negative component to it because that's what I'm starting to understand is obviously the Buddha said that there was good desires, right? Like the desire for the noble life. So there is some kind of way to do desire right. And then there's this negative component that I'm starting to notice that I describe it negatively because it has a kind of a fire element to it. It's like hot and it's kind of yeah, so this desire, or really what I'm trying to differentiate is that, you know, a desire that's being acted out in the present moment where it's like they're like desires become will in some way, right? Because will is something that we're doing in the present moment, it's action. Desire is kind of like something that you want, it's a way you feel when something isn't right about something, right? So like there's a process by which desire becomes what you're doing or something, right? So there is a way to live with desire or to understand what's a good desire, what's a bad desire, right? There's a fire feeling negative desire, like addiction, compulsion, those kind of things. And then there's like some kind of better way to take action, which doesn't have that fire element. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Thank you.
All right. Here's the point then. Let me make this, and then Robert, you can come in. You pesky wabbit. That's, by the way, very common, mixing R's and W's. So you were right, Corey, about the Buddha. Let's investigate that, because that's in fact what we need to do, and that is the difference between wholesome desire and unwholesome desire. Or a better way of even saying it, the difference between wise desire and ignorant desire. Because it's not desire itself that's the problem. Liking something and wanting it is not is only a step in the wrong direction. It's when we gotta have it. So there's a difference between the upādāna and the tanhā. Tanhā is meaning I want it, but the upādāna means I've got to get it. I've got to have it, or I've got to become that. Okay, so looking at it from the perspective of Paticca we can bring it back to the point that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa makes about wisdom at the point of contact. When something contacts you, then the feelings that you have about it will be wise feelings. Now, one of the points of wisdom that we can look at is twofold. Basically, they're the same thing, but we can look at it from two different directions. One is that is it immediately available for us, or is it something that's going to take a long time or a lot of work or something like that to do? An example of that is somebody who is standing on the street in front of the Sears Tower and desires to go to the top of Sears Tower to take a gander. While he's up there, he has the thought, oh, I wonder what New York City looks like from the Empire State Building. And now he has a desire to go to the Empire State. Well, going to the top of Sears Tower in Chicago was easy enough. All he had to do was walk in, pay the $5, and go to the top. Now that he's at the top of Sears Tower, wanting to get to the top of the Empire State Building, that's going to be quite a haul. And you can't just magically pay $5 and go to the top of the tower. You just can't do it that way. That's not how it works. You've got 500 or 600 miles between Chicago and New York. So the physical reality is that you can't have what you want. So wanting something that you don't have and cannot have, and the more you want it, when you can't have it, that's when the desire becomes tanhā. Okay, so that's one kind of it, the kind of wanting something that we cannot have. And the best example of that is your average Joe Blow meditator in a meditation course wanting enlightenment. And he can't have it. Why? Because he wants it and he doesn't know that he's already got it. And so if you have something but you don't know that you have it and you have to work really hard to get it, now we're going really into the state of delusion. So this is another point that we can look at, and that is the danger. That this is basically the teaching of the Buddha, is to recognize what is dukkha and what is not dukkha, because sometimes desire is not dukkha. Then in fact the desire would be to get out of the dukkha that you do see. And so it's not desire itself that's unwholesome or unhealthy. It's the ignorance that is involved with it, in the sense of ignorance about what we want and ignorance about how to get what we want. And so if we can begin to work from the perspective of wisdom, then we can recognize, oh, this thing may be dangerous. Therefore, let me be very cautious about rushing into it. You've heard that fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Have you ever heard that? Okay, this is what we're getting at, is be careful about what you want, because you might get it and it might be dangerous. And also be careful of what you want, because you might not be able to get it. And if you cannot get it, that's another kind of danger on its own. Why? Because if we want something and we cannot get it, look at all the effort and work that we're doing trying to get it, and we wind up being a failure, we wind up being frustrated, we wind up being in a victim's position because we can't have what we want. So wanting things that we can't have is dangerous. So in all regards, we can think of it in the sense, are we wise enough to see what in our life is dangerous and what is not dangerous, so that we can decide to choose what we want. So that wisdom then, based upon that we choose what we want, rather than choosing what is dangerous for us because we're not wise. So wisdom then gives us the point of, oh, maybe I should not want this right now, because if I want it, it's going to cause me a lot of effort and a lot of work. Something as simple as Tab just brought me a cup of ice water. She could have brought me a Coke, but she brought me ice water. So now that she's brought me ice water and I want a Coke, guess what? No Coke in the house. That's why she brought ice water. Don't have Coke in the house. Or maybe it's a wine cooler that I want. No wine coolers in the house. Or maybe it's something and the good issue would be Johnny Walker Black Label. I want Johnny Walker Black Label. There's none in the house. All I've got is ice water. Will I be comfortable and happy with the ice water, or do I have to have the Johnny Walker Black? If I have to have the Johnny Walker Black, guess what? If I go down to the place and on the island where they do sell alcohol, they don't have Johnny Walker Black there. It doesn't come to this island. So that means now I got to go all the way to Bangkok, 1,500 kilometers, to go get the Johnny Walker Black. And I start walking through various liquor stores in Bangkok. Guess what? No Johnny Walker Black. It got red, but I want the Johnny Walker Black. Now what am I going to do? Get on a jet plane and go to Los Angeles just to get to? I better go to Kentucky. And if I wind up in Kentucky, I might have different kinds of trouble. All because I wanted something that I could not have. Now, I know that that's a ridiculous point, but look how many people do very crazy things like this. That they'll go way out of the way to get something that's actually dangerous for them, simply because they want it and it's not easily available. So when we work with it from that particular perspective, we can say, okay, well, we'll keep both of these up. Number one is, if I get it, will it be dangerous? And number two, if I want it, can I get it? Is it easily available? So if the meditation student says, well, never mind about that imaginary enlightenment, let me just sit here and take a deep breath and relax and be a little enlightened and enjoy that. So that's not dangerous. But wanting a very highfalutin kind of magical enlightenment and then not getting it, that's dukkha. But I should make the statement that many people who meditate actually wind up giving themselves more dukkha than they would have if they hadn't practiced meditation at all. I know, I've been there, I've done that. Robert.
So I have a quote from Nietzsche. Curious to hear your thoughts on this. Anything which is a living and not a dying body will have to be an incarnate will to power. It will strive to grow, spread, seize, become predominant, not from any morality or immorality, but because it is living and because life simply is will to power. Exploitation belongs to the essence of what lives as a basic organic function. It is a consequence of the will to power, which is after all the will to life.
Precisely so. That's a very highfalutin philosopher's version of what I was saying before, which is that we have life itself is the will to live. That we do have will. That it is an absolute lie to say that there is no free will. But Christians want you to think of that. They want you to think that God's plan, and you got to go according to God's plan, whether you like it or not. Okay? Well, if that's true, then the thing to do is says, okay, Mr. Christianity, I like God's plan. I got nothing. I got no problem. God did a pretty good job of it. And I don't need any more. So, this issue of destiny is the issue that we cannot change because God's got a plan. The problem with this is terminology, because it wasn't God's plan. It was what the little child, when he was growing up, each one of us took on as a set of rules from all over the place, not necessarily from God. So it's all of our rights, rules, rituals, specifications, standards, and all of that kind of stuff that defines the parent ego state, which then gives us marching orders for the rest of our lives. And Christianity calls this God's plan or God's will or destiny. You are destined to do it that way. And that we have language in our culture that goes along with that. You probably heard the expression, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. Why is that? Well, he might be a really good swordsman at the age of 20. At the age of 40, he's slowing down. And at the age of 60, he's going to get cut in half. Sometime or another, if he's going to survive, he needs to put that sword down. He has to make a change in his life. He no longer can go around with the sword because somebody's going to be faster and better at it than he is eventually. But even that guy, if he lives and continues to live by the sword, the one who cut the first guy in half, he's going to get sliced in half too, unless he puts down the sword. So this is the issue of destiny. If we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, then we're going to have to deal with the results of that behavior, the fruit of our behavior over time. But the teachings of the Buddha show that we can, in fact, put down that sword. We can tear down that wall and make something new. Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's also like a game theory aspect to this, I think, too, when it comes to the sword, where, game theory shows that if one person is willing to die by the sword, the other person feels they also must be willing to die by the sword, or else they're going to end up dying by the other person's sword. And I think that, self-preservation instinct is a big source of people dying by living and dying by the sword, is they feel that they have to lower where they are in the game in order to stay in the game at all.
Right. And so the ignorance then is at play. The question is, where is the ignorance? Perhaps the ignorance is continuing to play the game, even though the game is dangerous. And we don't see the game as dangerous. And so we can stop playing the game. In fact, you could say that most businesses is kind of like a game of swordsmanship. That guys will be the CEO of an organization for a few years, he'll be on top, but the underlings are going to maneuver to shove him out. I mean, look how often that happens. I mean, Elon Musk used to be the king of Tesla, and now they've moved him out of the chief post. The same thing happened with almost all of them. I think that, in fact, that it happened. There's a couple examples where it hasn't happened yet with Zuckerberg and Bezos, but it'll happen. They'll get shoved off. They'll get moved out of the way. And not only that, but they will be conquered with the same swords that they got on top with. So the right thing to do is to wake up, to take your fortune, and to walk away and leave those guys to run the company without having to bury the bodies.
Right.
All
So,
right.
so here's a
Go ahead.
question. So if you were in the prisoner's dilemma, right, where you have two people that are arrested and they were accomplices in a crime, and they're told that if they so the rules of the game are, if one person rats out the other person, the other
You get the
person does
lower
not
sentence.
rat them out. The person that does not rat out gets a much higher sentence. Then if they both rat each other out, then they both get a reduced sentence. But if they both are quiet, then they both go free, right? Or they have a very reduced sentence. So, what do you
That's
think the
pretty
right
wishful thinking. Once you get nabbed, it's going to be hard to get out of it. It's better just to go ahead and confess, unless you've got a really, really good alibi.
So
That's
you would recommend the prisoners to both confess?
Oh, absolutely, immediately, if they have done it. And if they have done it, then you need to immediately figure out how you can prove that you didn't do it. Otherwise, go ahead and confess.
Hmm.
Now, the will to live will go in and say, well, I am innocent and I will fight it forever. And then, in fact, we have that on a regular basis, basically because DNA is much, much better solid evidence than eyewitness testimony. That, in fact, eyewitness testimony is not necessarily valuable, but that's all we've had for many, many centuries. But, in fact, you could say that if you go into court and say, this cop did that while he was arresting me, then nobody's going to listen. But if you take a videotape of that into court to prove that what you're saying is true, then you'll probably get off, right? But if you just go and tell the judge, this is a bad, dirty cop, the judge is not only not going to listen to that, but he's probably already friends with this cop. I mean, that cop's been in his courtroom, 1,000 times in the past 10 years.
Sure.
And so you're not going to get a better sentence by telling the truth in that regard. This is a problem with that prisoner's dilemma, is because the prisoner's dilemma is something that philosophers talk about in philosophy class, and it's not out there getting arrested.
Right.
It's just a philosophical kind of discussion. The same thing is true with the trolley car, that if you don't do anything, 5 people get run over, and if you do something, 1 person gets run over, right? Those are philosophical kinds of things that don't actually happen in real life. But what we're getting back to with what Corey was talking about, though, is the issue of, if we stop because we can see the danger that I'm going to get arrested if I keep doing this stuff, then I will stop doing it. This is the whole point about will, is also has to do with choice, to where often desire does not have any choice about it. In other words, once we want something and we really want it and we want it badly, we can actually do one of 2 things. We can either change by not wanting it, or we can continue to want it and go down that rat hole and wind up in grave danger, like getting arrested for taking it. So the best thing to do is to not worry about what you're going to do when you get arrested. The best thing to do is to worry about how you can prevent yourself from getting arrested.
I guess another interesting component to this whole issue with desire is that desire has a very high appeal to it. It's very appealing. Like, that's how desire always compels you. It's like undeniable attraction, right?
I like it.
So
the feeling of Vedana, of I like it. Okay, that's the attraction.
yeah.
Benefit.
And so it's very easy to recognize what is desire because it's so obvious, and it's so, but wisdom doesn't really have as much of a high appeal to it, so to say. A perfect example of this is the other night. I was I've eaten like too late in the evening for a couple nights because I've been like just indulging, and it's given me like late night indigestion. And so on this night, on the 3rd night, I saw the wisdom component. I was like, if I eat this, it's past 7 p.m. It's going to lead to indigestion. I just can almost bet on it, right?
That's
so the
right.
wisdom.
Your tummy knows that clock, and that clock tucks
Yeah.
in, and tummy says, "All right, I'm going to give you indigestion."
Yeah. Normally it's not so known, but this time my stomach was really having issues. It wanted me to know. So I could tell that I couldn't really tell for sure, but I knew it was pretty likely. And so I could, and then I did get very, very, very mild, minor indigestion later on. But anyways, when I had this moment of like seeing the wisdom versus the desire, I could see both of them. And I could see that the wisdom would be to, ignore the desire, just wait it out. Like 5 minutes later, it'd probably be gone, right? And then I could just move on with maybe going to bed on time or something more positive, right?
Well,
But
you
instead,
don't have to wait 5 minutes to
yeah.
move on.
Well, I mean, like the desire would go away if I didn't indulge it. So I could tell with quite easily that the wisdom.
No, what I'm getting at
intense,
is that you did it.
Yeah.
You did something else, though. That in fact, because you didn't indulge it, you went and did something new.
Yeah.
That's the point. Is that you did take that much effort to go do something else, and then the desire, you forgot about it, and so it kind of melted away.
I didn't do that. That was what I thought. That was the wisdom thought. In the moment of choosing good path, bad path, desire versus like will to resist the desire, I saw the wise choice. It wasn't appealing at all. So that's kind of like what I was talking about with the discussion. There are these decisions where we come to in life where you could see the wise path, right? You could see with wisdom, you could see the consequences, the pros and the cons, and you could kind of weigh them against your past decisions. And the wise choice is not very appealing. It's usually kind of like, in that moment last night or whatever the night before, the wisdom was don't eat snacks late at night. Or if you do it very rarely and accept the consequences. But I could see that the wisdom of not eating the sugary treat wasn't very appealing, right? It was kind of cold. It was kind of dark. I could see it was a good idea, but no appeal to it at all. So that's
Okay.
a modern dilemma. Wisdom isn't appealing a lot of the times. Desire is always appealing.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I understand what you're saying. But what I said before also applies in this case. So let's have the scenario, because what you're doing now is that you're lumping together a sweet over a period of time without recognizing that this is actually a choice that you make over and over and over and over and over again. Let us say that you have now opened that sugary treat, but you haven't taken the first bite, but you've already opened it. And so you do take a first bite. While you're taking that first bite, you're saying, did I really want this? Is this as good as my thought of it was before I actually had this bite? And what will this bite do to the tummy? And then you chew that one and you swallow it, and then the next bite, you see that sweet sitting on the table, and you're asking yourself, shall I take another bite or not? That you don't have to actually eat it all. Now, this is something that happened. I don't know if it happened to you, but it really did happen in the 1950s, and it happens to poor people all the time. And that is that the little children in a poor house will always have the idea from their parents that food is valuable. And because of that, mommy has served you some. I actually remember a conversation that I had with my mom, and I was about 3, maybe 4 years old, when she served something and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And she told me, listen, I have worked for you, I have given you this food, and there are children in India who are starving. And my answer to that was, mommy, put it in a package and mail it to India. But her rule stuck with me, and I see it even now that I am embarrassed to not eat all of the food that Tam serves. That you're supposed to clean your plate. You can't have any dessert until you clean your plate. Okay? Which means that in that snack that you're eating at night, when you open it, now you've got to eat it all. Because you've been taught that. And what I'm advising you to do is to bring that wisdom up with every possible movement that you're making. Can I leave it sitting there on the table? Or do I have to pick it up? Now that I picked it up, do I have to bite it? Now that I bit it and had the taste of it, do I have to swallow it? Now that I've swallowed it, do I have to keep that food out on the table, or can I go put it in the refrigerator and save it till later? That in fact, that's one of the ways that I train myself is with the dogs. Often, the last morsel that I eat, after I've chewed on it, I'll pull it back out of the mouth and give it to one of the dogs as the last thing. That they get the last piece of food. Okay, but all along I'm feeding them off of my plate because Tam always fixes more food than I really want to eat. But I've got to clean the plate. And so I've got the dog. Okay, so that whole idea then now is that we have 3 areas of the brain, all of them involved with this, and all of them have a kind of little war going on. And so the child mentality wants the taste of the sweet. Oh, I like it. Once it's open, now there's the rule saying now that you've opened the sweet, you've got to eat it. And then both of those are fighting with you over the wisdom of what are you actually doing here? And so can you bring the wisdom into every action?
How would you do that? how does one develop a wise mindset, or how do we so like today, I feel like I had a moment where I was able to adopt the wise mindset. I came in, my dog had chewed up my cord, and it's a little puppy. So that cute little brown puppy. Poof, come here. Come here, Poof, Poof. I named her Poof and Honey Badger. Oh, 1 second. Poof, come here. Poof. Look at this little honey badger.
Oh,
She's so cute.
oh, he is cute. That's what,
Oh,
7 weeks old, huh?
wow,
Yeah,
adorable.
she's about 2 months old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't wait to take her to the fair. You know, maybe have some ladies show some interest. Ultimate cute dog. Just kidding. I'm probably not going to do that, but it would be a good idea too.
All right. Well, one thing that you have to know now that puppies chew. So what you want to
Yeah.
do is leave things in the vicinity of the dog for the dog to chew on, and the things like your power cords that you don't want them to chew on, the data cables,
Yeah.
put those up. The shoes, put them up. That's
I
actually
tried my best. And that's kind of what happened with the wisdom moment. Was I came in and I made 2 conscious decisions at one point. One was that I didn't want to beat or discipline or hurt the dog at all. She's so tiny, and I've noticed that in other dogs, when I'm raising them, if you kind of discipline them too much or in a certain way, like if you get angry as soon as you
they
come in the
become
door,
human.
it gets really bad. You traumatize the dog. So I didn't want to
They
break her
become
little
human
spirit.
in that trauma.
Yeah.
That's the traumatizing. That's the thing, that you're wise to it, but most people are not wise to the fact that they traumatize their children by getting the child to behave,
Yeah.
threatening
Yeah.
them with violence, giving them violence. Okay, and that's traumatizing. So I'm really glad that at this age for the puppy that you're not traumatizing the little dude.
Yeah, she's so cute, and I really wanted to, because I feel like if you're not careful, it's very easy to break the spirit of an animal. And there's a specific kind of feel that you get when you have a bond with an animal who is healthy and happy, and that's what I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
go for. So I made that decision at some point. I think I got mad because she peed on the carpet, just because I just flew into a rage. I think that's a normal thing, or at least it's kind of normal for me. Because it's a rented apartment, and it really gets into like money and then emotions and anger, and that's what I've seen everyone else do. So, anyways, there's a bad natural habit.
That's right. Being angry at a puppy for crapping on the floor is learned behavior.
Yeah, because I just kind of, when I rationally thought about it, I just figured the health and happiness of my puppy is worth whatever cost in terms of cables. It's $10 cable, like in terms of little things that maybe I have to replace, carpets that I have to wash and shampoo. I'm going to pay those prices and accept the consequences of really having the puppy, right? I've decided on that ahead of time, and I've decided to not get angry and traumatize the puppy, right? So today, when I came in, I had already made the decision that in the future, when I run into this heavy, virile, reactive anger emotion, I'm going to be wise. I'm not going to get angry at the dog, right? So today, that's
Correct.
what it felt like.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the first
Wisdom
thing
felt
on
like
that would be
spacing out.
there, without us getting into the details of it right now, we've got better things to talk about. But one of the things that I would recommend for you to do is to go online and find out how to potty train puppies.
Yeah.
Okay, because you're the one who is responsible. The puppy is just crapping because the puppy needs to crap. You're the one who is setting the
Yeah.
rules about where it can be done.
Well, she's pretty good already. I would say she's like 80% potty trained, which is really good for her age. Usually when she makes I think it really has to do with bladder size because she probably can't hold it for very long. But she's really good about it. So whenever there's not really too many problems, so that's really a good part. But I've already decided to try to, be real gentle as much as I can.
Right. That it's not going to do you any good at all to get angry at the puppy.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not going to do the puppy any good at all. if you can see that, Corey, with the puppy in this case, do you not then be able to see that getting angry is not appropriate in any case, in any place? That's the way to understand anger is that it's not ever appropriate, and that it shows lack of control because we're unhappy, deeply unhappy, because we can't get what we want. Like the puppy is on the carpet. We don't want that brown spot on the carpet because I'm responsible. I am responsible for the carpet. Right? But when we recognize that the anger itself is something that and it took me years to figure that out. That for quite a while I could go into the point, and I stayed in this place for years, that I could control my anger, and I knew that I could control it, and I did not get angry until I thought that the anger would be of value to me, that I will get my way because of anger. And so I was going around being angry, ignorantly angry, thinking that, if I am angry, I'll get my way. And that was proven finally to me at a very, very ridiculous situation, to where my anger prevented me from getting what I wanted rather than allowed me to get what I wanted. In fact, people had to throw me out of the room to shut me up so that they could go do what I wanted to do. But I couldn't do it because I was angry, and the people that I was trying to deal with were not having it. Okay, so now I can happily say that there is no place for anger. There is always a better choice than anger. But it takes a while for us to understand that, because when we're angry, we want our way. And almost always anger is based upon fear. That if you're not afraid of losing something, for instance, you wouldn't have gotten angry at the puppy for crapping on the floor if the carpet wasn't there. That is, in fact, carpet being hard to clean is part of the place for the anger. And the fact that you're responsible for that carpet. So where here in this house, the exact opposite. This is an old house. It's teak floors. The floors are rotting. We've had many sections of the floor replaced and whatnot like that. So it's kind of a hodgepodge. The paint or the stain is wearing off of the floors, and where people put their feet in certain places around the doorway and whatnot like that. And so it's kind of a mess anyway. And so it doesn't matter. There's another issue, and that is that the big dogs like to hang out on the step landing where it's all concrete and it's really cool, which means now the puppy can't get down and go outside. And so because the puppy is trapped in the house, it's okay with me that the puppy is continuing to crap on the floor, and I'm not even bothering to try to potty train her. Okay, so it's a different situation, but really the difference is the mindset between you and me, because I used to be exactly where you were because that's how my dad operated. That you're supposed to be angry at a puppy because my dad got angry at a puppy. But my dad had no clue about what anger was. He was an unskilled, ordinary person, and I picked up a whole lot of rules from unskilled, ordinary people. And so now it's time to put down all of those rules that we learned from unskilled, ordinary people and start picking up some wise rules based upon the Dhamma. Dukkha, dukkha, nirodha. Okay? That in fact, if you get angry, you've got dukkha, and so does the puppy. If you don't get angry, then you can train the puppy easily. That in fact, you're saying the puppy trains themselves. Generally, that's true. We don't have to potty train children. We don't have to potty train dogs. They'll do that on their own. It's natural. But Dr. Spock ruined a whole generation of children. They were called baby boomers. because of the potty training that was done in the 1950s. Sit down on that pot and give me a turd. And if you don't do it, you're going to be really unhappy until you give me that turd. That's what Mommy told me. I mean, she read that out of a book.
It's so demanding.
So,
I demand a turd from the child. Wow. Yeah. It's a new
well,
level of demanding.
Can you imagine? That's what potty training is all about. Because
Yeah.
Mommy doesn't want to change diapers anymore.
I
This was
definitely
out of
have
a book.
noticed there are some kind of like problematic issues with the older generations. Like I kind of started to notice it when I would have certain behaviors that were problematic, like dismissing and kind of, belittling my nephews. Things that all the older adults from the older generation would do like normally, like kind of like ignore and avoid you while being in the same room, or kind of like just like there's really subtle things that I wouldn't say are healthy or things that I would do going forward. But so much of the older generation did these to me growing up that they really normalized a lot of bad behaviors. Like they're from the previous generations, specifically like for the farther back you go, that things get more and more messed up. But even one or two generations ago, they still had really backwards kind of ways of living and thinking and raising children. Like I remember a really common one is kind of this attitude of the child is annoying, right? The child is annoying, so the parent will occupy you with something or tell you to go to your room. Literally tell you to go to your room. I don't think I ever would tell my nephews to go to their room just because they annoyed me. I would just eat that annoyance. I would sit there and I just kind of like deal with it on my own, right? So like with a little bit of the mental training and the understanding, I could see kind of like what normal, good, healthy behavior would look like because I could feel the anger or the annoyance rise up and I could be mindful of it and then let it pass with a little bit of thought and mind control, right? But the older generations, they don't really have that training. They're more reactionary and reactive. And like these trends of behavior that, a lot of them generate or they start from books like Dr. Spock or other ones, big pivotal books or things that change the mindset of a generation. And then, yeah, they lead to these kind of like problematic behaviors that a lot of us can notice because it's like the trickle down effect, And yeah, like kind of being a little bit dismissive and like heavy product or work based, right? A lot of that. And yeah, oh, it's kind of interesting, but also refreshing that things are changing a bit for the better now in the younger generation.
Actually, that's an important point for you to make, and I want to reiterate it really strongly. And that is, look at it from this perspective. When did public education start? When did it start? When did public education start? You know?
Probably thousands of years ago, like a long time ago. I think they've always had schools.
Well,
not
I
like
say
mass
schools,
like
I'm
today's.
saying public required school. When did children get required to go to school?
Maybe like 100 years ago or something.
You're right, exactly. During the 20th century is when children were required to go to school. Now imagine southern Louisiana or perhaps Alabama, where children were born in a shack. They'd never traveled 10 kilometers from where they were born. Whether they're white or black doesn't make any difference. That in fact, all they learned was local. So they were really, really kind of ignorant. That in fact, you could say on one side of the tracks, the black community, and on the other side of the tracks were the white community, but both of them, the little children that were coming into those communities because they never went anywhere, never got any education, even though they were raised completely differently, they were both raised miserably. And they were raised to hate each other. Right? So that when we have public education, the whole idea of public education is number one, almost all, not all of them, you can't do it always 100%. But now we're raising it from 1 or 2% of the children getting educated into about 85, maybe 90% of them getting some kind of an education. All right. That's basically what has going on. Now, to put it in a different perspective, you have heard Martin Luther King's favorite expression that the arc of justice is long. The arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. The answer to that is no. It is not justice that bends. It's knowledge. That over time, humans have become more and more knowledgeable, and now look at it in the fact that even the Dhamma is becoming somewhat public knowledge. People are beginning to wake up. Another point is that psychology and psychiatry and whatnot like that didn't get, I mean, they normally, there's two people that are involved with that. One was Dorothy Dix, who you probably never heard of, which started doing psychiatric work in the late 1800s in the United States. And then there was Sigmund Freud. Okay. We don't have much about psychology before that. And in fact, much of the psychology of those times was highly, highly influenced by Greek mythology. So you could go so far back as to say that Greek mythology, when it's used right, is a kind of a psychology. But basically, it's in our, at least in kind of my lifetime, is when so many things have happened. Okay, 1, public education. Number 2, electricity. Number 3, electronics. Number 4 would be computers and technology in general. We're talking about 100 years ago, even automobiles were quite rare. 120 years ago, they were non-existent. Well, okay, 130 years ago. But anyway, you get the idea of look how much has happened in the past 100 years. Think about it now. In fact, just yesterday, there was a power outage that lasted from about 8:30 in the morning till about 6 in the evening. No power, and it was hot. Not only that, but the power runs the pump from the well, which meant no water. Now, you guys don't put up with that, but I really understand it, that life, what would life be like without electrical power for you? Your whole life would change. I mean, look at what you do for entertainment now. Almost always, whatever entertainment you have, you're either going to have to get in an get in the gas-powered vehicle or turn some electrical device on. A computer, a television, a radio, something that did not exist 100 years ago. This is profound to think about, that the whole world for the entire human society has changed drastically in the past 100 years. And the children 100 years ago did not travel, did not get an education, generally did not learn to read. And so that meant that almost all of their rites, rules, and rituals came from either their immediate family or the little town that they lived in, perhaps a church. And that was all, 100% of their entire education. No psychology, no history, no mathematics, just the rules of the road. And so look at how much misery there was back then. A lot of misery. So we're much better off now because we have knowledge. That I'm very grateful for the knowledge that I got. The most gratitude that I have is for Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and Achan Po, because that's where my important knowledge came from. The knowledge of the Dhamma. Go ahead, Robert.
So to respond to Corey's point about the dog training, I would ask, are you familiar with positive reinforcement with
Yeah,
dog?
yeah, that's what I'll do. When she goes outside, I just give her a little bit of petting, really excited, and like, oh yes, yay! And that's basically all I use.
That's all it takes.
Yeah,
That so now you're expressing exactly why you're getting her potty trained. Where the situation with the other dogs here make it difficult for me to potty train the puppy, and so I'm giving her a break.
Right, and I would say so we've recently had a really interesting journey in our household here. We have two dogs, and we've been sending them to professional dog trainers here in Colombia and South America. And one of the things we've learned from them is, when the dog does something wrong, you say no. There's two different types of no's. There is kind of a less stern no and a more stern no. There's the no that is no, and there's the no that is no. We're really trying to get across. And however, you want to always praise them, but there's different types of praises too. There's muy bien, very good, right? Like good, would be like the English version, which is supposed to be soothing and calming. And you would even give them a muy bien when they're doing the right thing without you even asking them to do anything. Like right now, my dog is here relaxing on the couch next to me, our dogs. And I should say to him, muy bien, because we like him to be in this calm state. But then there's second type of phrase, which is premio, which is where you give them a gift, you give them a treat, that kind of thing. And so, one way you could maybe apply that to your dog is, I'm not sure if she has any treats that she really likes, probably does, most dogs do. And maybe bring some of those with you and take her outside. So when she pees, you can hand her a little treat, so she begins to really associate, the treats with being outside. Then eventually you won't need to do it anymore. But, once she gets really excited about those treats, she might even hold it in so that she can get the treat once she's outside, and I think we
Well,
can also apply this. Okay. And I think we can also apply this to our own minds, right? Where instead of feeling guilty about being angry at the dog, you can
I'm
say,
glad I caught myself. Exactly.
yeah, yeah, never mind, start again. I'm glad I caught myself. That's great. I caught. That's great. I'm choosing not to be annoyed right now. That's great.
Mhm.
I'm choosing not to be angry or anxious or whatever. And then think about how you're going to reward the dog when she does it right, and maybe help her to do it right as soon as possible.
Well, one thing about the dogs is that um, it's part of their DNA. This is something that's very interesting about dogs because a dog is a dog from birth. Puppies are noted for chewing on things, and they learn. But one of the things about a puppy is that they will learn to not uh, spoil their own nest. The humans are like that too. This is why the
Yeah.
dogs will naturally want to go out. They naturally want to go out in private. I mean, I've got a couple of dogs here, and I would say the puppy is different because of the situation. But for Lucky and Poon Pooey, I don't think I've ever seen either one of them take a crap since they were puppies. I don't know where they do it. There's either got to be a big dog pile in the sky, or maybe they're just all over the place, way out there someplace. I think is really what's going on. And so this is just kind of natural. And so you're rewarding the puppy for what it's going to be doing naturally, which means that it should be a very easy thing for you to learn or for the puppy to learn to do. Should be very easy. But
hmm
with humans, we have been taught, and it's really built into the culture, that a child should not be a child naturally. We have to train and educate that child and teach that child something in order for them to get along in the world. That you could say that, in fact, that every one of us is born a wild animal. And so there's a certain balance that needs to be done. That if a child is never disciplined, under any circumstances, never disciplined, he will probably, if he ever is diagnosed by a psychiatrist, will probably be diagnosed as a sociopath or a psychopath, right? That if we are, let us say, if the child is raised in a dog-eat-dog environment, which is exactly opposite of what I'm talking about, a completely permissive environment, the dog or the human will become a psychopath. But if they're in a dog-eat-dog environment, then they'll move back and forth between the victim and the aggressor, which we all will spend time as a victim and time as the aggressor. That in fact, we wind up being the aggressor to ourselves and victimize ourselves because we've got both elements within. Okay. Now, the point that I'm making here is that often children in our society are overly socialized. That in fact it's gotten really bad with time structuring. I remember when I was a little kid, up until about the age of 6, time to go to school, I was all over the yard. I was all over the place. We went to the 2-block tunnel. We were all over town, doing anything that I wanted to do. Had complete freedom as a little kid. Now the little kids, they have what they call a helicopter mom.
Saludos. That's okay.
Where the parents are looking out after the kids all the time. What that means is that we're going to wind up being far more socialized and uptight than we would be if we were given the freedom. There's always going to be a balance, because I know that we were talking story a little bit before about 100 years ago, nobody got any education, which meant that everything was learned locally, including all of the worst elements of the little local society. That in fact, it seems like that when societies get insulated, they go really downhill into tribalism. That you can see that, in fact, that within immigration in the United States was that when a big city had a lot of different communities, for instance, in Detroit, you've got a Polish community, you've got an Italian community, you've got a bunch of whiteys, and they all tend to get together. But one or two of those Polacks or maybe a Jew goes to Alabama, and that child has got a problem, because the community that lives in is insular. They don't know anything about the outside world, and so anybody who comes in from the outside world is dangerous by instinct. So our educational system is good in a way, but oftentimes the educational system is teaching the worst things or taught in the wrong way. Here's an example of that. That a child who is raised in a household that has multiple languages, like Spanish and English or Thai and English or any combination, then the child has a propensity to learn both languages because he hears both of them. We lose our ability to learn a new language at about the age of 12. There's a lot of stuff that happens with the human brain that changes things so that we slow down on our learning, we go into puberty, and all kinds of weird stuff happens. And yet in our educational system, foreign languages are not taught in the 1st and 2nd grade, where the child is easily going to pick up a foreign language. They wait until high school. And now the foreign languages are really, really difficult to learn because the mind has already been fixed in a way that makes the languages difficult to learn. So these are some of the problems that I find with our educational system is that we don't teach the children what they need to know at the right time for the learning. They teach it according to some syllabus or something that was invented, 60, 70 years ago. I mean, if you wanted to learn French in Dillon, South Carolina, the only place to learn it was in the 10th, 11th grade at high school with a French teacher. She's the only one in town that taught French. There was, by the way, in Dillon, South Carolina in the 1950s and 60s, no Spanish classes, but there was French and also Latin. Those were the only two languages that were taught, but they were still taught to the kids that were too old to learn the language. And so the kids didn't learn much French. So these are the kinds of things that are problematic with our educational system, but it's almost always winds up being out of balance. If we are, and we talk about balance in the sense that we can be playful, we can be serious. We've got both sides of us. But the way that we are raised in our society is that people are raised to come out of their playfulness and come into the serious and then stay serious for the rest of their life, and they wind up being miserable for the rest of their life, serious and all, because that playfulness was trained out of us in childhood. Now, the thing of it is that you could say, well, back in the old days when kids didn't get an education, that meant that they wound up being more playful for longer periods of time in their life because they weren't subject to the educational system that we have nowadays. So you could say that in some cases, the educational system solved problems that the society had, and in other cases, like the one that we're talking about here, that the educational system and all of our modern technology is skewing us in a different direction so that our dukkhas now are different than they were 100 years ago. Now, another thing that I noticed, and this is in the sutta number 38, where I figured out that the Buddha talked about that the young children who were raised in the time of the Buddha were raised in sensuality, and that's possibly because the children that he was around were in wealthy families. And so the children at those ages just were allowed to go and do whatever they kind of wanted to do, and they were pleasure seeking. And so the Dhamma that the Buddha developed for those people were because they were sensually oriented, because those sensual things were hard to come by, but people were after them. Now the sensual things are very easy to come by. I mean, 2,500 years ago, who had a cell phone? 2,500 years ago, who watched the internet? 2,500 years ago, who got to ride in a Mercedes? Nobody did. Okay. Things, in fact, about the best thing that you could have would be a horse. So, in our society now, one of the things that has happened that is greatly different than the time of the Buddha is the fact that now, over the centuries, we have piled on rules, laws, rituals, so that every child is born into a society that is just completely packed down with rules, leaving us almost all as victims to the rules that we have been living under our whole lives. So the mentality or the personality of the people in the time of the Buddha were different than the personality of the people that we have today, mostly because of the authoritarian oppression that came along with the educational systems, as well as the freedom to have sensual desires that the people didn't have 2,500 years ago. And so things are much more complicated today, which means that we need the Dhamma today even more than we did 2,500 years ago. That we're really messed up now. People were not nearly as messed up 2,500 years ago as they are now in general. So if we can understand that, then we can recognize, oh, that means that we have to really pay attention to how messed up our society is. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, so this is this ties into a podcast I was listening to recently. A American Eastern / New Age, spiritual practitioner guy was talking about how he felt that Buddhism and the whole like way of eradicating desire was far more suitable in a time where you didn't have great abundance, the way that we have today in terms of, abundant food, abundant water, abundant electricity,
Abundant
medicine,
rules.
etc. Yes, and that
Abundant.
in today's society, because there are so many opportunities and there's so much more abundance, people shouldn't actually be so afraid to pursue their desires. They should chase after them and enjoy that pursuit instead. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
The problem is the chasing. The problem is the chasing. Chasing all the way to Bangkok for Johnny Walker Black when it's not even there. That's the problem, okay, is the chasing, that in fact you could say that the availability of all of these material goods that have become available in the past 100 years don't make them more available to each individual person. Each one of us still has to work and to suffer not getting what we want, while now there is just so many more things to want. There is just so much more to want now. And so that even brings in more confusion, more doubt, more worries, more frustrations. And so that point about, yeah, things are more available now, but that doesn't mean that they're more available on an individual's level. It just means that they're more available on a manufacturing goods level. So that things are manufactured, things are there, but look at all of this complexity that's been added to where the human mind um, that was developed, 10, 12, 14, 30,000 years ago, hasn't gone through the development that it needs to develop to handle the modern society that we live in. And so we wind up almost always being miserable when the philosopher will say, with all of these goods and all of this stuff in the world, why aren't we all happy with it? I mean, that's what we've been working on. We've been working on getting our technology together for 1,000 years, 2,000 years. We've been working on getting our technology together. Look how good we've got it. I mean, we've got integrated circuits, and we've got 1 billion transistors on a chip and all kinds of things. So our manufacturing is very, very technologically advanced. And as we do, the human society that is taking advantage of this technological breakthrough is no better off. Worse off, in fact. We're worse off than we were before. Now there's more things to want, more things to be disappointed by, more rules to follow, more standards to keep up to. The kids are not allowed to play the way that they were because there was nothing else to do with the kid but just to let him go play. Go to your room and go play. Yes, Robert.
Right. Yeah, and two comments on that. One is what they didn't have back then that we have today is a mass psychological warfare that's trying to get people to want things all the time, 24/7, through advertising, our devices, etc. And there's this giant struggle, ongoing struggle between people trying to be content and happy with their lives if they're lucky, and getting messages
And
from the
having to
society.
deal with all the lies they've been told. That's another point that I haven't worked with too much. But in fact, you could say that all the rites, rules, rituals, laws, procedures, etc., like that, is nothing but the bucket where we carry our lies. And we have been told thousands of lies in our lifetime. And that what we need to do is to find a method that's going to free us from the lies we've been told. Well, the only way that we're going to be free from the lies that we've been told is by looking up, waking up, and recognizing that the way that we're doing things is based upon a pack of lies. And it's easy to pick up those pack of lies. An example of it is that a particular product is no longer known by the name of that product. It's now known by the name of a brand that was selling that product. An example of that is Kleenex, right? Kleenex is a brand name. The actual item is a tissue. So we will say, give me a Kleenex, right? This is the kind of delusion that's built into it at such a deep level that we don't even recognize that we're constantly being lied to. We lie to ourselves. And so the waking up then back to this issue of the free will, we recognize that if our will has been told all of these lies, then my free will is only going to be free in the sense that it is allowed to roam within the box that these lies have created, that we really don't have that much free will. But one of the free wills that we still have is the will to live. And this is an important way of looking at it, and the way of wrapping this talk up is to recognize that we do have a will to live, and it's possibly the best feature that each one of us has. It's the will to live, the will to stay alive, the will to take the next breath, the will to stay alive this moment. And the next part of it that's coming really in with the Dhamma is now to enjoy that we are alive, that we do have the will to live, that I do have the ability to take this next breath. Or in another way of going just one step further, that we do live in a paradise because we will that the environment that we're in is a paradise, rather than being following the lies that we've been told that our environment is a hellhole and needs to be fixed. That we don't live in a hellhole. We live in whatever world we create. And it's up to you to create the world that you're going to live in, but don't do it with the lies that you've been told your whole life. Do it through direct observation and get some new data. Now, Robert.
Yeah, so two things. So one is funny comment about dogs. Whenever I'm on the line with you, one of our dogs, Bowie here, always likes to come close to the call and listen to the Dhamma talk. It's very funny. Like this dog in particular really likes to come listen to the the talks. It's very cute, very hilarious. Maybe he was a monk in a past life, you know, I'm not sure, but
Yeah, well, maybe he was a monk when he was a puppy.
yeah,
Hi,
maybe.
Matt. Good to see you.
Good
Hi,
to see you,
Dhammarato.
Matt.
Good to see you.
You
Hi,
left a
Robert.
while. I'm glad to see you back, actually.
Yeah, I
and
went to.
then the,
Go ahead.
So
sorry.
talking. Go ahead, Robert.
So then the other comment I was going to make that I thought was pretty interesting. I saw yesterday a video. It was a TED talk being given by an indigenous leader, and he was talking about how his community had transformed in the last 50 years. He lives in the Amazon in the Colombian, Ecuadorian part, and how when he grew up, there were no oil companies, there's no deforestation going on, etc. And there was a sense that every single thing they needed was available for them in the jungle. And there was no lack or want or desire. But once the oil companies came in and they destroyed the ecosystem, then they suddenly had this sense that they really needed to want things in order to defend their territory and also to bring stuff in, because the abundance that was there for them is no longer available to them. They've no longer felt nurtured in the same way by their environment once they had this invader. And I was curious to hear your thoughts on that. Perhaps that's maybe how it was in the time of the Buddha too, you know, where the natural environment was so much richer.
Provided everything that they needed because they didn't have an education about what they needed that they didn't have because nobody knew about it. For instance, we all need a cell phone now. We all want a cell phone now, but in 1950, nobody wanted a cell phone. They didn't even know what it was. That in fact, have you ever heard of the expression "hang up on somebody"?
Hang up
The
on
hang
somebody?
up, yeah, hang up, right? That's a common phrase that we use in telephone language, right? How do you hang up a cell phone?
You
How do you hang it
throw it
up?
out the window with the
You
string
can't
attached.
hang up a cell phone. You can push it, you can push the screen, but you can't hang it up. No, and let us say 100 years ago, and you can go look for wall-mounted phones and see Google's thing. But the telephones in the really old days were wall-mounted, and they were wall-mounted with the microphone up so that it could tilt up and down based upon your height, and then you would take the earpiece off of the holder and put it to your ear and talk into the microphone and hold the earpiece. And when you wanted to finish the call, you put the earpiece back on its hook. That's what we mean by hanging up, is you hung
Yep.
up the earpiece. We haven't had a telephone for 100 years that had a way of hanging up. And yet we still use the expression of hanging up on someone. Isn't that interesting? We can't hang up on people anymore, but we still talk about hanging up on people. This is how our culture and the lies that we've been told. I mean, you guys have never seen a telephone. You'd have to go look at Google to find out the kind of telephone that I'm talking about. And I haven't seen one since I was 10 years old. And yet we still talk about hanging up. That may be an expression that only I would have. Do you guys ever use or ever hear the expression hang up on someone? I'm sure you do. Seems like it would be a common enough, right? So it's still part of our society, right? That's just another lie that we've been told. We don't hang up on people anymore. Why do we talk about hanging up on them? And so this is one of the things that we can do with our Dhamma is begin to play with the language that we have. Because the language that we have um, is our intellectual way of understanding things. And we begin to recognize that most of the problems that we have in our existence is because of the way that we define the terms and the way that we look at stuff, the language that we use, etc., like that, which Robert was talking about in the sense of propaganda. Most advertisements are lies. They started off, I mean, you can see the commercials for medicines. Now, when I was a kid in the 1960s, pharmaceutical companies did not advertise. No advertisements for pharmaceuticals. But nowadays, what they have almost invariably is a beautiful scene, a mountain, a beach, a fancy building, something like that, with two elderly people, a man and a woman, while they play soft music. And then at the end, which is about like a third into it, is when they start reading off the stuff that's required by law of all of the side effects. And if you listen to the side effects, you would wonder, why would anybody want to buy that medicine? The answer is because all the visual and all the sounds with the music and all of that is supposed to create a pleasant feeling when you hear about that medicine. So you'll have a pleasant feeling because of the medicine based upon the imagery and the situation, rather than people listening to the dangers of this medicine. Yes, Matt.
I didn't hear you mention this point, but on the prescription drug commercials, I frequently see that they show people being happy. And it's not just true for drug commercials, but generally advertisements show people like if you get this service or product, you're going to be ecstatically happy.
Well, how about cars? When they advertise cars, don't they show kids running and jumping into the car? Yeah, That's the way that it is, right? That they are actually selling happiness, but they're lying to you because they're saying that, oh, we're not really selling happiness. You've got to buy our product, and the happiness will kind of come along too. An example of that would be, have you ever heard of the term chick magnet?
Yeah.
Okay. What is a chick magnet? It's a car you can't afford. But if you do get this car, somehow or another, it'll attract chicks. And what you really want is a chick, not the car. But you got to buy the car in order to get a chick. Right? That's what our whole society is based upon. It's based upon that set of lies. That in order for you to be happy, you have to buy something. You have to get what you want. And so the advertisers are going to make you want it, make you think that, oh, I will feel the way those people do who have it, that it will give me my happiness. And so what they're doing is they're actually promoting desire. They want you to be in a state of desire. Our whole society is based upon people wanting to be in a state of desire and in the process, but never the conclusion of fulfilling that desire. They want you to stay in the process of it. And in fact, a lot of the pharmaceuticals mentioning that, the pharmaceutical industries could find cures for things, and eventually they do. But in the beginning, all they want to do is eliminate the symptoms so that they can keep you buying the drugs and keep sick. If they cured you, you'd stop buying their drugs. But if they can cure the symptoms, then they'll keep you to keep buying the drug over and over again. An example of that is Tylenol. People will buy Tylenol or aspirin. In the old days, it was aspirin, and people would have aspirin and more aspirin and more aspirin and more aspirin, and they would feel good for a little while. But if they would take their mind off of whatever they were thinking about, then they wouldn't give themselves a headache, and therefore they wouldn't need the aspirin. And so, or the Tylenol or whatever they're selling nowadays. This is the idea then is that our society, as sophisticated it is more sophisticated than the humans that live in that society. That we're all a bunch of doofuses that are capable of managing ourselves 30,000 years ago, but in this society that we're in now, we're all incompetent. And therefore, we feel like a victim. And everyone goes, even the CEOs of the companies, of the big companies, they're all victims. Everyone's a victim. And we have a whole society full of victims. We're all victimized. And this is where the teaching of the Buddha really comes into play, because 2,500 years ago, everybody felt a victim, but it was really simple back then to figure out that, oh, I don't have to be victimized. I can come out of it. But now the society that we have in is every child is just layered after layer after layer of lies, layer after layer after layer of rules, layer after layer of making your mind feel victimized, where in fact you could, if you really started to practice it, begin to feel like a champion, to rise above it all, to get above this world. That you heard me talk about, everyone is an emperor of our own personal pile of dirt. The question is, why is it most people are buried under their own pile of crap? And then many meditators are trying to call themselves out of the pile of crap, when the real point is just to sit on top of your world, to be on top of your own pile of crap. Now, in that regard, that doesn't mean that we remove the pile of crap completely. No, we just sit on top of it happily. You're never going to be perfect, but you can be happy, imperfect. But it's an attitude that we change. Everything about the teaching of the Buddha winds up being this issue of samma sankappa, which is right, noble attitude, to have the right attitude about life. And the attitude is, you're a winner. You're in charge here. You're having fun here. This is your life. If you can will to be alive, why can't you will to have a joyful life? Your choice. But we have to practice. Why do we have to practice? It's because look how many years we've been practicing according to the society that we were living under. We have been trained to be a victim. Now it's time to reverse that, but it only does a little bit at a time. So if 10,000 times you put a kilogram of victimhood, in order to balance that out, we're going to have to put another 100 kilograms of joy to balance that out. So we have to actually practice being joyful, because we're already in the habit of being a victim. This is why we have to practice. This is the issue over and over and over again. Never mind, start again. Never mind, start again. Yeah, I feel victimized again. Never mind. Buck up, get our mojo, and get back on top of your pile of dirt. Matt, you got a question?
I have a related question to this issue of like victimhood being piled on top of one another over a period of many years. I've noticed that a lot of people can become joyful at home without like visiting Watts. So I'm just curious if you have anything to say about maybe some people have enough conditioning that they need to have immersion periods at Watts.
Well, I would say that that would be very nice if people could find a refuge to get away from it all. And you mentioned going home. Yes, and going home is often for many people quite a relief. But there's another darker side to that, and that is that when we are out in society, we have rules to follow. We have to obey the traffic issues and whatnot like that. And so when we go home, we can then do what we wanted to do at work that we couldn't do at work. And what I'm referring to now is sometimes referred to in psychology as the pecking order. So the boss, the big boss, yells at one of the managers. The manager yells at one of the employees. The employee yells at the janitor. The janitor comes home and yells at his wife. This is the point, okay, that we're getting at. Once he goes home and yells at his wife, because he can't yell at the people that at work, they're all more important than he is. And so he has to come home and yell at his wife yells at the kid kicks the dog. In other words, we find that pecking order, and we only pick on the people that we think that we can win against, because we're victims to the people who are above us in the pecking order. Also, what this means is, Matt, is that when we go home, we feel okay to let our hair down. I don't see many people here with much hair, but if they let their hair down in the sense of letting their worst stuff out. We often hear the term domestic violence. That very violence is either going to be in the house or in a closed bar, but it takes a very special, unique situation for people to be out violent on the streets. Normally, we reserve our violence because of our society are not supposed to be violent. Therefore, you've got to hide your violence. And so we take it home. So going home doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to be happy. What it means about going home is that now they don't have to follow the rules that society has. And some of us will feel relieved by that and can just hang out and do nothing and say, well, I'm really glad I don't have to be at work right now. And other people, the majority of us, are still going to stay grumpy. And that we're going to take it out on the people that are in our family. That the kid is going to kick the dog because he can't kick his mom. And the mom is going to yell at the kid because she can't yell at the husband, and the husband can't yell at, so it goes back up that way, and so it always keeps going downhill in this pecking order. So figure out where you are in the pecking order that you're in, and every situation will have different pecking orders, and then find out a way of stepping out of that pecking order, to become above that pecking order, that you're not part of that pecking order, that you're lokatara, you're transcendent, you're supramundane, you're above it all. You do not have to get caught in that pecking order. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So it doesn't matter how entrenched, hardcore, or massive the pecking order is, we all still have an opportunity to see the pecking order that we're in right here, right now, and to come out of it. So this goes back to the issue about eating, when at night we're going to feel upset stomach. The issue is not, do I open this packet of food and eat it all and then worry about how I feel, but whether that I can do this with each bite. That we start breaking things down into this particular moment. What are we doing right here, right now? Because this is what needs to be changed. Not the big stuff, but just the little stuff. What's happening in this moment? Because if you start paying attention to that sweet, you may say, wait a minute, the thought of that sweet was actually more tasty than the actual sweet itself. That this is not as good as I thought it would be. This donut's been in the refrigerator too long and is no longer enjoyable.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me? I had to take my earphones out. But
yes, I can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
I had a shocked look on my face because I realized when you suggested that strategy, because what will happen for me is I usually feel the choice, the kind of tipping point usually happens 1 or 2 minutes before I actually take whatever action it is, but then I kind of, so like, for example, when I eat the cookies, I usually decide to eat the cookies. I'm usually kind of like battling it out. Like when I'm in the other room and I'm kind of like thinking about it and no. And then there's a point where I come to, and that's the decision point. And that's really when things kind of, the feeling really shifts from being like a desire that I'm having a battle about to just being something I've kind of accepted that I'm going to do it, or that's when the choice is made. But a choice is a kind of unique feeling because choices don't really feel like things that we do in terms of like picking up a pencil. It's kind of hard to, it's easy to know when I picked up the pencil. I could put it down and, oh, I picked it up 10 seconds ago. It's very distinct what it is and what it feels like to kind of pick up something physical. A choice is like a mental restructuring of your mind or your attention or something. It's really hard to actually figure out what a choice is and what it feels like, because it seems like no choice is the same. It's like a snowflake or something. Each choice is different. What it feels like in terms of, is how much, anyways, like desire versus will. So usually that's how it will happen for me, is when I make a choice or a decision to pursue a desire, I'll usually feel it kind of like I'll feel a battle but in my mind, and then at some point I'll just kind of give it up and be like, I'll just go do it. I'm just going to do the thing, eat the cookie. And then that's what it is for me, or the way that I'm kind of set up now is I'll have the battle when I'm not even in the kitchen, and then I decide on it, and then I immediately go for it. And so that's kind of like what I'm calling the decision point, when things shift and I go for it. As I realized so that's a kind of,
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's just kind of hard for me to hear with the way that my phone is on right now. But so that in that practice, it's kind of like I make one decision, and then the next time I have consciousness again is 3 minutes later when I've eaten all the cookies and the milk is gone, and suddenly I'm kind of sitting there, and then I'm like, what did I do? But I could kind of see how if I was eating the cookie, and I really didn't want to cook the cookie, because every time I give into something, it's usually a very benign thing. I usually don't try this with really harmful things. I usually try to practice restraint on something that's not very bad if I did get it, like the cookies. So anyways, And then I started to try and practice by, eating one bite, being mindful of the cookie, eating one bite, being mindful of my goal, or eating one bite. And if I did that practice, I would feel so guilty by the third or fourth bite that I probably wouldn't eat but one cookie or half a cookie, right? So there's some kind of a
But you don't have to feel guilty. You could feel wise instead. Oh, I'm waking up to the fact that my idea of this cookie was better than the actual cookie itself. Here's an example of that. Have you ever eaten day-old food like a hard piece of bread or maybe French fries? Day-old French fries at least day-old donuts are tolerable, but day-old French fries, we eat them anyway out of habit. Instead of eating this French fry and say, this thing is hard, it's greasy, it's cold, and it has no relationship to the thought of the French fries that I have in my mind. This French fry is not good enough. And then I eat it anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's what I was told and kind of what I've always learned is that you don't make choices on a moment by moment basis. What I've been kind of told and what my experience has shown is that we make a choice and then we carry it out rather than that every moment is a choice.
Mindlessly carry it out.
And that's kind of, that's what I've noticed too is it's much more easier to do it. It's more pleasant. It kind of works with this certain archetype or setup of the mind, that really prioritizes these kind of base instincts of minimize pain and high pleasure, monkey mind kind of behaviors. They're set up in such a way that, I don't know, that it just doesn't really occur to be mindful of, or to ask kind of those things, in each moment, what's the desire, what's the dukkha in this moment, what's the dukkha, what's the pleasure, or what, I don't know. It's just kind of like a different practice of being, different mindset to
wake up and watch
I feel like
what
I
we're
make
doing.
5 decisions a day. I don't feel like I make 30,000, but I probably make closer to the 30,000,
Well, at least 1,000. At least 1,000. I don't know how long your days are. But here's something that we're really, really talking about, something that can be found in Sutta number 10 in the Majjhima Nikaya, which is the Satipatthana Sutta, where the Buddha talks about being mindful of what your hands are doing, moving, stretching, that in fact, maybe it is 30,000. Here's an example of that. Here's an object that I have in my hand. How much decisions does it take to pick this stuff up? That in fact it is a can of ointment. It's the same thing as you would find, you call it monkey balm or tiger balm or whatever like that, okay? And so I've got a reason to pick it up, like I've got an itch. And so moving my hand towards it is a decision. Touching it is a decision. Lifting it up is a decision. Opening it up may take multiple decisions because these things are pretty hard to open. Now I've got it open. Okay. Now, what am I going to do with it open? Well, I've already made the decision a while ago, but I've got to make that decision again that I'm going to take some of that stuff and put it on my arm. So I've still got it in my hand and I've already done 10 decisions. Now I've got to have the decision to put the lid back on it, put it back, putting it down, taking my fingers away, and withdrawing my arm. Look how many decisions are done in there, and this is where the Buddha is beginning to invite us is to watch what we're doing with every little tiny decision that we make. Watch the hands and start playing with it in the sense of instead of reaching the way that we normally reach, we're not thinking about it at all. We just go ahead and grab because we're using the old decision that we made. And so the new decisions are very fast. But if we slow things down, then we can recognize, I'm making a decision to touch this thing. And so as I approach it, I'm going to do something. And one of the techniques that we use is to stretch the fingers out. That in fact, if you've seen some of the old movies like Nosferatu or the Dracula movies, just as he's about to bite the neck, his hands are like this, okay? So we need to start paying attention to what our hands are doing as we're touching things. And so as we touch something, which is the first part of the hand that touches it? Do I touch it with the thumb? Do I touch it with this finger? How do I touch it? When I'm picking it up, normally what happens with the human mind is that we're no longer interested in the touching and the picking up. We're interested in the object itself. So now I'm thinking about the object, but I'm not thinking about where each of the 5 fingers are holding the object. For instance, this little finger is touching it right there. The thumb is touching it right there. So looking and paying attention to our hands will give you the idea of looking at the decision process. But we forget all about our hands and start thinking about the object. So start paying attention to what the body is doing, because every movement that the body does is a new decision. It's a new choice that we're making. And that normally we don't want to go through that choice process. To make it easy, we just follow the old choices. That's called habit. We just go about to the old habit because that keeps us from having to make new choices. But the right effort is to look at what you're doing, knowing that you've got a choice at every step along the way. And so that whole box of cookies is not going to be eaten. You're going to mindfully open it, mindfully open the package inside, mindfully get one cookie, mindfully look at that cookie and ask the question, cookie, are you actually as good as I think you are? Because if you are as good as I think you are, then I will eat you. But if you're not as good as I think you are, then why should I bother continuing eating you? I can put a half a cookie down, or I can give it to the puppy. I don't have to eat it just because I had made the decision to open the pack. So we have a new choice, a new decision to make with every movement of the body, every motion that we take, everything that we do. Start paying attention. This is the sati, to wake up, to watch what we're doing with every little step. Now, this is very good for the day-to-day living, but we can also recognize and train when we're just sitting. When we're just sitting in meditation, you can call it that. Just sitting in meditation, what do we do? Where are we moving? What are our hands doing? Can we hold them still? Can we still process the data that the hands are giving us, even when the hands are not doing anything? So being in the present moment is really valuable when we're eating. And in fact, the Buddha in several sutras, we remember, Robert, when we did Sutta number 2 in the Sabha Asava Sutta, there is where we find the food reflection. Wisely, we will eat this food. Paying attention to every bite. That when we're crunching that cookie in the mouth, we pay attention to what the mouth is doing. Are we actually getting the enjoyment out of the cookie? That we don't wolf our food down mindlessly. That we start paying attention. We mull the food over in the mouth. We find that we get the texture of the food and start paying attention to it. And pretty soon we recognize that, oh, I've had enough food. Paying attention to this eating is too much work. That if I just scoff it down mindlessly, then I can get it all eaten. But if I mindfully chew, bite off each chew, and take a gander at what I'm doing, what did it taste like, what is the swallowing, then in fact, one of the things that the Buddha recommends that after you take a bite, you put your utensils down, or in the case of the bowl, we withdraw our hand from the bowl, leave the hands alone while we're chewing and mindfully thinking about the food, and we're watching. Normally, what we would want to do in this regard of being mindful is to chew the food until it becomes almost a liquid or a paste, and then we swallow the liquid. If there is anything strong or solid, like a corn kernel or a grain of rice or maybe toast that's still a hard piece, that we're going to continue to chew it until it is ready to be swallowed. And then at the end, we check the whole mouth to make sure that there's no grains of rice or corn or anything like that that's still left in the mouth, that we've completely emptied the mouth. Only then will we go back and put the hand in the bowl. But how many of you, while you're eating a plate of food, your utensils there, you're playing with the food while you've got some in the mouth? So start watching what you're doing, slow down your eating, and pay attention to each bite that we have. Now we've got a whole bunch of decisions. We're going, if we start living our life like that, we are thinking about it in the realm of about 30,000 choices a day. Every choice. That when you're turning your beard, even as you're moving one index finger, that's a choice. Where you've got your thumb, that's a choice. Stroking it is a choice. Nodding your head up and down and raising your eyebrows, that's a choice. But the decisions you're making, and so this is the whole point about free will, is that look how much free will you are exercising.
Well, my theory is that everything is will. So every action is always everything is an action of will. And so the real mystery is this other component to like mindful will or conscious action, and then mindless, or like there's a clouding element, or obviously it's the mind is doing something. The way that our mind is functioning is kind of like set up in a certain way to take one like choice or one action that's going to like promote our survival, like eat some food and then like kind of consume something and then think about where to get the food next, right? So it seems like the default programming is one conscious action or one conscious decision or one conscious moment every or maybe 5 minutes every 6 hours or something like that. Or it just seems like there's these wide long periods of mindless activity and action, even though we're all conscious and awake in a certain way according to science, and seems like we're really doing things. But this element of conscious awareness of what we're doing, and it's like a distinct different mind state and consciousness state.
A good example of that is driving a car. We all struggle as teenagers to learn to drive a car. Some of us never learn to drive a stick shift because we have automatics. I wonder what happens in 15 or 20 years from now to where the child doesn't even know how to start a gas engine because he's driving and has been for his whole life in an electric vehicle. They don't even know what to do with a gas vehicle. But after you learn to drive, now that we're tooling down the road, we don't have to think about every little thing that's going on. We just drive according to the habits that we picked up when we were learning to drive, right? And so all of this is mostly motor movements with the hands and the brakes and the foot movements and all of that kind of stuff to drive the car. That gives the mind complete freedom to eat a McDonald's, to talk on the cell phone, to hang up on somebody, to yell at the kids, and all kinds of things that are going to put the situation, so long as the road is the same as it was, we don't have to pay attention to it. Unfortunately, road scenes change always, which means that that people like that are prone to accidents because they're driving mindlessly. that one of the things that I have is kind of humorous. I saw this in a movie, and it rang so true, that a rich man who has a chauffeur does not want an ordinary taxi driver chauffeur. He wants a Formula One race car retiree. Why? Because in that very, very high speed stuff, you've got to watch where you're going or you're going to die. You have to watch where you're going when you're going at 200 miles an hour or whatever like that. So that's the kind of guy that the rich man wants as a chauffeur, is somebody who is going to know how to, not only knows how to drive that car, but knows enough to know that he's got to watch where he's going. And then he's going to be safe. But most drivers are not interested in watching where they're going. They're more interested in getting to their destination. And while they're on the way to the destination, they're going to be eating McDonald's or hanging on their cell phones or yelling at the kids or gawking, rubbernecking, all different kinds of things that we are doing that make our driving dangerous. Okay? Now take that out of the car and start talking about living our lives, and we live our lives the same way. We're not paying attention to what we're doing. Are you actually paying attention to what you're doing with that pencil or pen that you've got? Swinging it around. Are you actually watching that? Are you actually mindful of what you're doing? Like me, I'm mindful of the way that I've got my hands, twirling my thumbs ever so slowly, just having a joyful, okay? So that's what we do, is we start paying attention to what we're doing, moment by moment by moment, because otherwise we don't have any choice. We're doing it by habit. But when we wake up and are mindful, sati is there. Now we have a choice. That's the whole point, is we don't have a choice until sati, until we wake up. And once we wake up, now we've got a choice. So practice waking up, practice sati. Where do we practice that? With each breath, making sure that this is a long in breath, sati. Making sure that it's a long out breath, that's sati. When you move your hand, be mindful of that. When you withdraw your hand, be mindful. When you put something in your mouth, be mindful of what it tastes like. What is the texture of the food? Which side of the mouth are you chewing it on? What are your favorite teeth? This is the way of beginning to watch what you're doing and how things taste. And as you do that, you have a choice about every bite. Every time that the mouth goes up and down, you've got a choice. If you know you've got a choice. Or you can just turn it on to automatic pilot, and then you don't have any choice about eating that whole bag of cookies. But if you're paying attention to how each cookie tastes, you're going to wind up not eating so many of them. You're going to wind up taking that cookie out of your mouth and giving it to the puppy instead. Yes, Todd, you got your hand up. Good.
Yeah. So okay. I agree, with all that it definitely feels that way. But I know from personal experience, from having done a lot of self-inquiry kind of things, the more you pay attention, the more you realize, and the more I've found. I mean, well, first off, where is the self that is having this control? But then also, the more I, am aware of what's going on, the more I realize I have no idea how anything is happening. I have no idea how I'm saying the words that I'm saying right now. Like, it feels like there's choice, but the more you pay attention to it, the more you realize that I have no idea how to even move my arm,
Uh-huh.
So
I know what you mean. Two examples of that. Have you ever been driving the car and all of a sudden you wake up and you look around and say, how did I get here?
Oh yeah, that's for sure happened. But even like if I'm very mindfully now going to reach out and pick up this mug, I have no idea how to actually move my arm or close my fingers around it or lift it. Like it's there's a as aware as I can be of the whole thing. The more you're aware of it, the more you realize there's no concept of a thing here that's doing it. It's or how to do it. I couldn't tell somebody how to move their arm.
I know exactly what you're talking about. In fact, there's a joke about it, or the story about it is the story of the centipede. That the daddy long legged spider that has 8 legs, he walked up and he saw the centipede going along, and he says, having 6 and 8 legs, that's a little bit of work. I don't really understand what I'm doing with this. How in the world can you, a centipede, work and walk around with 100 legs? And the centipede thought about it, and he lifted up one leg, and then he fell over. And in pain, he says, I don't know. I don't know how I use it. I could do it until you ask. All right. What does that mean? That means that we do things by such habit that we don't even know the procedures. So we need to start looking at all of these little tiny choices that we're making along the way, because they were choices. They were just pre-programmed as part of the habit or part of the program. And so now we're going to start breaking that program down and start looking at every line of code, because every line of code is a choice that we're making. This is what we mean by free will. Can we do that? Can we start watching what we're doing? Because if we're watching what we're doing, we've got a choice. And if we're not watching what we're doing and going by the old program, then we don't have any choice about it. Okay? So, sorry to say, but it's taken me about 2 hours to get to the punchline of the joke, and I'll lay it on you now. And that is that they say that there is no such thing as free will, because if you are doing things mindlessly, you're following an old program, and there's very little will in there. But if you start to wake up to see what you're doing step by step, then that takes effort. It takes some energy. It takes some work. It takes something of value to do. In that regard, if you develop it like this, it will not be free will. It will be expensive will. There is no such thing as free will. Will is expensive. Even if you're laying under a pile of rubble, that because the building has been bombed and you're laying under there and it's really hard for you to breathe, you're still going to breathe. You're going to take that will to do it, to stay alive. Will is not free. Will takes effort. That's the whole joke. Will takes effort. It is not free. But if we go along according to our destiny, that makes it look like it's free will, where in fact we don't have any choice. So there's no will at all in that regard. So he who lives by the sword is going to die by the sword, because he is not mindful enough to recognize how dangerous it is for an old man to go around threatening young dudes with a sword. He's going to get his head cut off if he keeps doing that. It needs to stop. Okay, so your cookies are the same way. That you need to be mindful of those cookies, because those cookies are dangerous. They're going to give you heartburn if you keep eating them. So we need to find where is your limit. Start looking at what you're doing. Pay attention to this cookie, this bite, this mouth movement. That's the way that we break it down, is so that you have a will. Take your will, knowing that it's expensive, that the whole point about, let's say it this way, that on the Eightfold Noble Path, the actual method to come out of one's suffering, guess what? Will is there. Where? In right effort. We have to take the effort. Will is not free. We have to take the effort to come out of our bad habits. And how do we do that? as quickly and with as much time discrimination as possible. So we don't say that, oh, I'm going to make a decision 2 or 3 times a day. No, we're going to start looking at it that we take 1,000, and then pretty soon we recognize that we're making 30,000 wills every day. Over and over and over again, we're going to break down these habits into their constituent component parts and recognize that there is a step of will or a step of effort in each one of them. And that you can do it. You're the champion here. That so long as we're under habits, now the results we don't have any choice about. And so that's the ignorance. The ignorance is going by the habit. The wisdom is to watch every movement, to get into the habit of watching every movement, every breath, every cookie, when I say every, I'm talking about basically this cookie, this breath. If we talk about every, then the students will say, oh, well, I can't do it every time. I'm such a victim. Well, then don't use the word every. Use the word this cookie, this one, this present cookie, this present breath, this present bite, this present hand movement. Yes, Robert.
Yeah, I just wanted to share one fun sati that I've found recently. And I work as a writer, and I've recently had the task of writing social media for a financial institution. And it's been very fun because they want really tight character counts, no more than 150 characters per post, or 75 in some cases. And so you really have to watch each individual character. Anytime you can cut out words to replace them with a shorter one, take 3 words, replace with 1, you do it. And it's a really fun game. And I just thought, since we live in such a text-based world these days, I think it's just fun in general to think about how you communicate over text. Like, use fewer words. Can you be more economical? Can you use punchier words that are more fun to read, etc. And so it's been really fun and doing that. And for people to take a look when they write a text, each letter, each character, each word makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Another point, Ron, that would be not just short, but clear.
Yes.
Short
Exactly.
and clear. That's a problem that we often have. Many times we can make it very short, but not understandable.
Right.
And sometimes we make it way too long and too complicated, and it's still not understandable.
Right, which is also funny because the topic I'm mainly writing about is fixed income and bonds, which is a pretty esoteric topic. And so you have to make that easy to understand, which is a whole challenge, which is fun for me. But
Corey, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, that sounded like really fun topic to me. Fixed income and bonds. I'm really into like business and those kind of things. I feel like spirituality is like spirituality and mind and psychology is like one of the big loves of my life, so to say. Like it's a natural talent for me. So I always like to learn and read, and I like to think and use my mind. And then like the other thing that I feel called to in life is like business. So like it's sometimes the really boring monotony stuff about business, like working capital management, like asset portfolios or worksheets. I don't know. They just seem like oddly appealing to me and really fun. So that's how I kind of know it's like my gift or my thing, because it just has a natural glitter to it for me. So, and when I'm reading it, I could kind of tell how dry and boring it would be for some people, like maybe more of an artistic type. But I have like business artistry, I guess, so I really like that kind of thing.
nice.
Okay. Well,
Great.
as Robert is saying, that means that with this we can mindfully break it down. Just like we're mindfully breaking down the hand movements and mindfully breaking down the chewing of the food, to start looking at the smaller things. So you can do that also with the financial. That in fact, I've gotten it down so simple now is I've only got one question, and that, will Tesla go up today? But keeping it simple is the way to go, by breaking it down to the constituent component parts, and recognize that you've got choice with every one of them. Every little action is done by choice.
What did you say your one question was? Am I going to feel better today?
No, my one question is, will Tesla go up today?
Oh, will Tesla? I thought you said, will my mood go up? And I was like, that's probably a really good mindset to have. Like, just kind of, like set a level of joy for the day and just be like, this is my level of joy. Anything makes me go below it, I'm going to question it. I'm going to stay mindful of it. I don't know. It just kind of seemed like an interesting technique. I was like, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll wake up tomorrow morning and I'll say, will my mood go up? The idea is that over time you train your mindset, you build your happiness, and then you just kind of like every day, because I don't know, that's kind of, we were talking about that earlier.
That question with the doubt built into it, we can have it stated, what am I doing right now to make the mood go up? I can do this. I can do this. Okay? That's, in other words, taking the doubt out of it, because you don't have any doubt like that. The reason that I mentioned Tesla was because right now it is so volatile. Up and down and up and down and up and down. I mean, it's been to over 1,200, and this down to, and it was down to about 600, and now it's close to 900, because it's up and down and up and down and up and down. And
that's a lot
the
of
question
fluctuation.
is, can you be okay whether the stock goes up or the stock goes down? Because it's going to do a change. Today it's up and tomorrow it's down. Up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. Can you be happy with it up and down?
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's why I stopped investing. And I've taken about a year off. In 2020, I got really close. I almost made like 10,000 on Doggy Coin, but after about 6 months of that investing, it kept making my mood. It was driving me crazy. I would feel agitated all day, and so I decided I'm not going to invest anymore until I have the training to not be bothered by my investment. So right now I have a kind of long-term autopilot. They pay dividends of like 2%. It's really horrible. It's mostly just beating inflation. But it's an investing mindset where I don't care about. I'm not.
You don't care. That's the right mindset, because if the stock goes up and you go up, and the stock goes down and you go down, that means that you are the stock. That happens also with politics. That if you're a Democrat and things go good for the Democrats, you're up, and when things go bad for the Democrats, you're down. It's better not to be a Democrat. Better not to be a Republican, because things are up and down and up and down and up and down. So in that regard, yes, I can ask the question, does the Tesla stock go up today or does the Tesla stock go down today? But it's not me that's going up and down. I'm okay.
Yeah, I just found another great way to tie this into the Dhamma. You know, Warren Buffett's a teacher of investing, Benjamin Graham, the founder of value investing, wrote a book called The Intelligent Investor, where he says the way that an investor should see the market is as a schizophrenic. And it is not, you do not want to talk to a schizophrenic every day. You know, you won't get anything out, you won't find anything of value in doing that. So what you want to do instead is find companies that, if the company went bankrupt today and they had to liquidate all of their assets, would those assets be worth more than what the price of the company is? And the whole idea is looking at things.
Oh, so value. You're a Romney, right? Okay.
Well, it's value investing. That Romney did private equity, which was different, but similar, but different. But
Well,
it's
destroying a
it's
company to get the parts out of it. I mean, they're about to start doing that now. That they're saying that, oh, if you die, that means that somebody else is going to get your organs.
Well, the thing is he wouldn't say to actually do that to the company, but just to have that mindset. And the idea being, what is this actually worth? You know, is it actually a worthwhile thing to invest in? Which is in some sense similar to asking yourself, is my emotionally investing in whatever I'm choosing to emotionally invest in something that is actually worthwhile? Or am I following a trend? Am I being
Excellent
manipulated?
point. To get away from it in the sense of the money and the stock market and all of that. But look at the emotional investment that you put into stuff. That's another thing to start to be mindful of. For instance, you can have that same sort of emotional investment in opening a bag of cookies, eating them all, and feeling nauseous. Right? It's the same thing. Is the buying of the stock goes down. Right? Except that it's easier for us to say, well, I am not the stock, I am not Tesla. But it's really hard to say, I am not this bellyache. We're much more likely to identify with the bellyache. But most people, in fact, that's the whole misery of the stock market. Another point about the stock, I wouldn't call him necessarily a schizophrenic. I would call him a criminal who is acting schizophrenic. Because that's what the stock market really is all about, is there's competition among criminals. Who can be the worst criminal without getting caught at it? Sometimes we get a Madoff and sometimes we get an Enron and they get caught at it, but most of the crooks don't get caught. But they still wind up being miserable anyway, because their money does not bring happiness. But their money does bring the fear of getting caught, the fear of disaster. Now that I've got all of this, I've got to keep it. I got to keep it. Instead of recognizing I was okay without it before I had it, and now I'm going to be without it now. And so, to go along with this whole point, not looking at it from the perspective of the stock market and investments, but look at it in the sense of your currency is now your time. How are you going to spend your time? Are you going to spend your time by investing in something that gives you good dividends? Or are you going to be spending your time out of habit that doesn't work so well? Eating yesterday's French fries, for instance, or eating a whole bag of cookies mindlessly doesn't wind up us getting any value or pleasure out of it at all, but we do it that way anyway. That's like the same thing as a day trader. Once you get in it, you're stuck in it. You've got to mindfully get yourself out of it, because otherwise you'll be stuck in it as a habit. So this is the whole teaching for today, is that you do not really have a free will, but you do have a will. And you have to take the effort to expend that will. And you can have if you take the right effort, you can have a marvelous, happy life. You're going to have to put some effort into it, because otherwise you're going to be habit bound. So this is a good talk today.
Yeah, I really appreciated it.
So let's go ahead and finish this off. We've really had a ball today. It's been over 2 hours. Robert, you've been off for a while. Do you have anything to add before we finish? Not Robert Cohen, but Robert. I don't even know your last name. The younger Robert. Robert, he's not here. All right. Does anybody else have anything to say? Todd, what do you have to say?
Thank you. Thank you.
Don't worry, be happy.
Or be happy. I've heard that before. Matt, do you have anything to say?
Nothing to add here.
All right. Well, I feel compelled to go do something. Hang on just a second. I'll be right back.
You see a little honey badger? That's what I'm naming her. Honey badger. Honey badger.
Adorable. So cute.
She's so ferocious sometimes. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's got.
I love the dog.
She's the runt of the
doggies.
litter, so she's the smallest one, and she'll like get really aggressive on the big ones, and they'll be like, "Arr, leave me alone." She's a real honey badger.
Yeah. Oh, look at that.
This is our new rat dog. This is a rat terrier. I looked on the internet to find that she is not necessarily a Jack Russell. She's much more of a rat terrier, because you can tell by the big ears that she has, as well as the behaviors and whatnot. Hey. Oh, there you are.
Wow.
Her name is Panda.
Panda.
Panda. That's because she's black and white. Kitty named her Panda. She's on. Kitty's standing here. She wants to know what we're doing. Here, Kitty. Panda is Kitty's puppy. So anyway, I'm glad to see all of us dog fans.
Man's best friend.
Yes. Wisdom is a good competitor with dogs, is man's best friend. Wisdom. Look at what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Okay. Does anybody have any final words before we finish this conversation today? Everybody good. All right, guys. Thank you so much. This has been a marvelous talk. I think that that you guys have gotten something out of it about free will, especially my little joke. There's no such thing as free will. It's expensive. You got to pay for it. You got to put in the effort.
Love it.
Then you'll get the value. Okay, guys. See you.
Thank
Cheers,
you
guys.
guys. Thank you
Take care.
guys. Appreciate it.